This is part 2 of .NET Return Test Questions and Answers video series. In this video, we'll discuss displaying database tables metadata in an ASP.NET Web Form. Notice that here within this sample database, at the moment we have got two tables, departments and employees. And here is what we want to do. We want to design an ASP.NET Web Form with a drop-down list and a GridView control on it. The drop-down list should basically display the list of all available table names within the sample database. And then once we select a specific table within the drop-down list, for that selected table, we want to display its metadata in a GridView control. So basically we want to display the list of all available columns within that table and their respective data types, as you can see here. So let's see how to achieve this. Obviously the first step here is to create those two tables. So let's flip to SQL Server Management Studio. So here is the SQL script to create those two tables. And if you notice, I already have this database sample, and within that I have created those two tables. I'll have the script available on my blog in case you need it. So that's the first step. The second step is to basically create a stored procedure which is going to retrieve the list of all table names from sample database, and for that purpose we're going to make use of this information underscore schema.tables that SQL Server provides. So let's flip to SQL Server Management Studio. So basically let's see what is there in that information underscore schema.tables. Notice that whatever tables we have within the sample database are listed here, employees and departments. And notice this column right here, table type, it says base table. Now it's very important that we use the where clause and filter on that column. So where table type equals base table. Why? Because if you have a view, that view will also be listed here. Okay, and we don't want to display views within the drop-down list, so that's why we need to filter on table type. Let's actually look at that in action. So for example, let's create a simple view here. So let's say create view, and let's call it view simple. Let's select the current date and time using getDate function, and let's give it an alias. Let's say today's date, for example. So we have that view created. Now look at this. If I don't use the where class, and if I select everything from information underscore schema.tables, notice that the view is also listed here. And table type, it says view. If we use the where clause, then we only get tables. Okay, and within the drop-down list we just want to display the list of all table names, so we just need to retrieve table name column from information underscore schema.tables. So instead of star, let's say table underscore name, and let's create a stored procedure. So let's call this create proc. Let's give it name sp get all tables as begin. So we have a stored procedure there which is going to give us the list of all available table names. So let's quickly execute that to make sure it works as expected. So that's one stored procedure. For the drop-down list to list all the table names, we are going to make use of that stored procedure which we had just created. Now we need another stored procedure, which is going to retrieve the specific table metadata. Once we select a table from the drop-down list, we want to retrieve metadata of that table. And here is the stored procedure which can do that. So we'll call it sp get table metadata, and obviously this needs to have an input parameter, the table for which we need to retrieve metadata. So let's call it table name, and then we are going to use information underscore schema.columns that's provided by SQL Server, and we want column name and data type from that view. So, and we are using the filter here where table underscore name equals whatever input parameter that we are passing. So let's quickly create that stored procedure as well. So select star from information underscore schema dot columns. So basically this contains all the columns that are available within our database. Okay, so basically we don't want every column. Okay, we just want the column name and the respective data types. Okay, and we need to filter because we want to retrieve it for the selected table. So we're going to make use of this table name column. So we are going to filter on table name column. So where table name equals whatever we are going to pass to this stored procedure as a parameter, and let's call it table name. And we don't want every column, we just want column name and data type. So column name and data type. Create procedure. Let's call it sp-get table metadata as begin. And obviously this stored procedure needs a parameter. So let's go ahead and call it at table name. And this is going to be of type nvarchar. And let's specify the length as 50. So a simple stored procedure there. I'm not sure if we have actually executed this command to create the stored procedure. So we have executed that already. That's why we get that error. So let's go ahead and execute this one. And let's quickly test this to make sure we get the data that we expect. So let's copy departments table here and then pass it as a parameter. And then let's execute this. We should get the columns that belong to that table and their respective data types. Okay, so at the moment we have got the two stored procedures that we need. Now let's go ahead and design our application. So let's create a new ASP.NET empty web application, and let's call it demo tables. And to this web application, let's add a web form. And we want to drag and drop a drop-down list. First of all, let's set the style attribute here, and let's set font family to Arial. Alright, let's drag and drop a drop-down list control. And basically for this drop-down list we want to set auto post back equals true. Why? Because whenever we make a selection, we want the drop-down list to automatically post back to the server. And let's go ahead and generate the selected index changed event handler. Alright, now we also need a GridView control. So let's drag and drop a GridView control onto the web form. And to make it look nice, let's auto format that and choose this colorful scheme. Okay, now let's go ahead and generate two bound columns. And to do that, click on the GridView tasks pane and click on edit columns. We don't want to auto generate fields, so I'm going to uncheck this box, and we're going to add two bound fields. Okay, so the first bound field, so basically we want to display column name and data type, right? So let's call the header text as column name. And where is this bound field going to get its data? It's going to get the data from this column underscore name column, because we are going to call this stored procedure to retrieve specific table metadata. So that will be our data field. So column underscore name. And the next bound field, header text, is going to be data type, and data field is going to be data underscore type, because that's how the stored procedure is returning the column name. Right, let's click OK, and let's get to the code behind file. And here we need to write some ADO.NET code. So let's bring in the required namespaces. We need system.configuration to read the connection string from web.config file. We need system.data, and we need system.data.sql client namespace. And within web.config file we need to define our connection string. So let's go ahead and specify that connection strings, and let's add a connection string. Let's give this connection string a name. Let's call it sample db CS for connection string. So here the server is going to be local server, so dot, and database is going to be sample, and we are going to make use of integrated security. So let's set that to true. Alright, so that's our connection string. And within the code behind file, first let's write a private function which calls this stored procedure spgetAllTables. So let's go ahead and write that function private, and let this function return data table, and let's call this getAllTables. And here we first need to read the connection string from web.config file. So we're going to make use of configuration manager class. So configuration manager.connection strings of what's the name of our connection string? It is sample dbcs. So let's copy and specify that here. So we want that connection string from web.config file. Once we have the connection string, let's go ahead and create the SQL connection object, passing in the connection string that we have retrieved from web.config file. So once we have our connection object, let's go ahead and create an instance of SQL data adapter, and let's call it DA. So new SQL data adapter, and here we are going to use this overloaded version where we specify the command text as string and the SQL connection object that we want to use. So here we want to execute this stored procedure spgetAllTables. So let's copy the name and pass it as the command that we want this data adapter to execute, and the connection object is going to be this connection object that we have just created. And then let's create a data table instance. So data table, let's call it data table equals new data table, and then let's invoke the fill method of the data adapter, which is going to automatically open the connection, execute the stored procedure, retrieve data, and populate this data table with the data that it has retrieved. So pass in data table. And finally what we want to do is return that data table. So return data table. Okay, so this private function is going to retrieve the list of all available table names from the database. So if not is post back. So within the page load event, whenever the page loads, if it's the initial get request, we want to call this function. So here we have our DropDownList1. So DropDownList1.data source equals getAllTables. So this function is going to return a data table which we are setting as the data source for the drop-down list, and we are going to invoke the data bind method. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see if it works the way we expect it to work. So basically at this point this drop-down list should display both the table names, that is departments and employees. Notice that we have a problem there. It basically says system.data.data row view, and that's basically because we have not specified what is going to be the drop-down list data text field and data value field. We need to specify that. So let's go ahead and specify that. So data text field is going to be, so basically if you look at this stored procedure spgetAllTables, it's returning only one column, that is table name column. So that is going to be our data text field. And similarly data value field is also going to be the same thing. So data value field. Okay, and another thing that we want to do is, notice that at the moment it's displaying two rows, meaning I think the first one is for departments and the second one is for employees. But along with the table names, we also want to display a prompt there within the drop-down list, something like select table. And to do that, I'm going to dynamically insert a list item to the drop-down list. So dropdownlist.items.insert. So we want to insert a list item. So let's pass a new list item. And list item is going to have text and value. Here text is going to be select table, and value is going to be -1. And in a bit you'll understand why we are setting the value for select table as -1, because we are going to use that to determine if the user has selected any of the tables or if it is select table. Okay, so basically if you look at this insert method, we also need to specify the index position where we want to insert this new list item. So we want that to be the first list item, so the index position is going to be 0. Alright, with these changes, let's run it one more time. And notice that we have both the tables there. The next step is obviously when we select employees table, we want to display employees table metadata within the GridView control. So let's go ahead and write another private function to invoke the other stored procedure that we have. So let's make a copy of this, and let's call this get table metadata, and to this we need to pass table name. So let's call it table name. So we are going to pass a parameter. Alright, so we first need to read the connection string from web.config file, create the connection object, data adapter instance, and then to this data adapter we need to specify the stored procedure that we want to execute. In this case we want to execute this stored procedure, sp get table metadata. So let's copy that and pass it as an argument. And this is the connection object over which we want to execute the stored procedure. And if you notice, this stored procedure is expecting an input parameter, so we need to pass that as well. So data adapter dot select command dot parameters dot add. So we need to add a parameter. So it's expecting SQL parameter object to be passed. So let's create a new instance of SQL parameter. And for a SQL parameter, we need to specify the name of the parameter and its value. So what is the name of this parameter? It's called @TableName. So that's what we are going to pass here. And we also need to specify the value. So what is the value going to be? The name of the table that the user has selected, and that is coming into this function as a parameter. So that's what we are going to pass here. Alright, so we added the parameter there, and then we are creating a new instance of the data table, and we are filling the data table with the data that's retrieved after executing the stored procedure, and finally returning the data table. Okay, and what we need to do here is within the drop-down list selected index changed. So whenever the selection within the drop-down list changes, that's when this event handler will be executed. So here if DropDownList1 dot selected value, look at this, if it is not equal to -1, okay, meaning the user has selected a table other than select table. Okay, so if the user has selected a table, that's when we want to call this private function get table metadata. So let's go ahead and call that. So get table metadata, and to this we need to pass the name of the selected table within the drop-down list. And how are we going to retrieve that? DropDownList1 dot selected value should give us that. Okay, and whatever we are going to get from this method, we are going to set that as the data source for our GridView control. So GridView1 dot data source equals that, and invoke data bind. Okay, so these changes, let's go ahead and run this and see if it works as expected. Okay, select a table, it should post back, and notice that we have an error here. Procedure or function sp get table metadata expects parameter @table name which was not supplied. So why is that? If you look at the code, we're actually supplying the parameter it is expecting, that is @table name. The reason for that is because we need to tell the data adapter that the select command is a stored procedure, and the way we do that is da.select command command type equals command type.stored procedure. Now you may be wondering, okay, here also we are executing stored procedure, but we are not telling the data adapter that it is a stored procedure and it's working fine here. Why is it not working here? That's, I think, because here we have a parameter and here we don't have a parameter. So if you are passing a parameter to the stored procedure, then we need to specify the command type, otherwise it's not going to work. And we have just seen the error that we have ran into. So with that change, let's go ahead and run this now. And let's select a table. So look at that, employees table has those columns and those are the data types. Departments table has got those columns and those are the data types. Now if I select table, look at that, it's not clearing whatever that's present in the GridView control in spite of posting back to the server. That's basically because it's retaining those GridView values from the view state. So to clear them, when we select table option from the drop down list, all I'm going to do is GridView control has got this enable view state property, so I am basically going to set that to false. So enable view state, at the moment it's true by default, so let's set that to false. Let's run it one more time. Now I select employees, so employees metadata there. If I select table, notice that nothing gets displayed. If we select departments metadata there. So quite straightforward. So here are the database. Here is the script to create those database tables, stored procedure to retrieve all tables information, and this is the stored procedure to retrieve specific table metadata. And then we have created an ASP.NET web form, dragged and dropped a drop-down list control, configured the GridView control. And then these are the two private functions which are going to call the stored procedures that we have written. And within the page load event, we are going to call that private function which is going to call this stored procedure. And within drop down, when the selected index within the drop down list changes, then we are calling the other private function which is going to invoke this stored procedure. And this is how that code looks. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.